All right, let's just dive right into this explainer, because today we're tackling a deeply uncomfortable reality about personal growth and the people we love. We're going to unpack some incredibly profound insights from a recent analysis of human behavior, and honestly, what we find might just completely change the way you view every single relationship in your life. We're talking about the illusion of support.
So I want you to think back for just a second. Have you ever noticed a smile from a friend or family member that arrives just a split second too late? You know what I mean, right? You share a big win, maybe a new goal, or some real progress you've made. Their words immediately say, "Oh wow, I'm so happy for you." But something beneath their tone feels, well, restrained. It's almost as if your growth just forced them to adjust themselves in real time. You probably notice it briefly, but you push it away because accepting what it really means requires asking a very uncomfortable question.
Because let's be real, there is a stark difference between genuine support and forced enthusiasm. It's so easy for people to cheer you on when your growth is just, a cool idea. They ask about your plans, they nod, they listen. It feels great. But the exact moment that growth shifts from theoretical to real, when you actually start earning more or looking better or just thinking differently, a silent and really uncomfortable comparison is created. Suddenly, your progress becomes a measuring stick.
To really get why this happens, we've got to look at the legendary psychologist Carl Jung. Jung introduced this fascinating concept of the divided human psyche, and specifically something he called the shadow. Now, the shadow isn't evil or monstrous or anything like that. It simply represents everything we chose not to become. Jung basically noted that people will do absolutely anything, no matter how absurd, just to avoid confronting their own souls.
So beneath the surface, the human psyche is deeply divided. We have the part we show the world, and then we have our unlived potential. That's the shadow. And here's where it gets tricky. When you suddenly succeed, your success acts as an uninvited mirror to the people around you. Without asking their permission, you inadvertently activate their shadow. You're literally reflecting right back at them, the versions of themselves they abandoned a long time ago.
Listen to this because it's absolutely crucial. People don't actually resent your success. Not at all. They resent what your success says about their choices. Your brand new discipline to wake up at 5 a.m., that's a glaring reminder of their procrastination. You decide to get fit, and suddenly your friends only want to invite you out for pizza and drinks? Your courage totally highlights their avoidance. It forces them to ask a heavy, regretful question. Why didn't I do this? To avoid that psychological pain, their mind immediately goes into self-defense mode. They subtly shrink your achievements, maybe chalking it up to luck or whatever, just so they don't have to feel small themselves.
Which brings us to Section 1, the social dynamics and assigned roles. See, human relationships are rarely built on pure truth. They actually rely heavily on predictability. We all kind of fall into these assigned categories in our social circles. You might be the funny one providing relief or the struggling one who provides a sense of shared limitation. These roles create emotional safety. Everyone knows their place, right? But the moment you step outside your assigned role, say moving from the struggling one to the successful one, you don't just change yourself, you completely disrupt the entire structural control of that relationship.
And because they feel disrupted by your growth, they are going to resist, but they won't attack you directly. That would make them the bad guy. Instead, their discomfort at your unpredictability shows up in these disguised sentences. They'll casually say things like, "Well, just don't get too ahead of yourself," or "Make sure you're being realistic." And that's usually followed by 3 really subtle steps of resistance. First hesitation, then subtle doubt, and finally, quiet withdrawal.
But wait, let's pause here for a second because the analysis takes a really sharp turn inward right about here. Think about this. What does that say about the times you've done the same? It's super easy to point fingers at our friends who pull away when we succeed, but if people resist growth to protect themselves, we have to honestly ask when we have resisted growth, not just in others but in ourselves. Moving to Section 2, the internal mirror and sabotaging the self. Because honestly, when you start growing, you face this intense internal negotiation. You unconsciously do the exact same thing to yourself, but you don't call it resistance, do you? No, you call it doubt or waiting for the right time. This phenomenon is actually known as psychological gravity. It's this invisible pull of your old identity and familiar structures, trying to preserve stability by holding you back from evolving. You see, your old identity is highly addictive because familiarity feels safe. The exact moment you begin to outgrow who you've always been, you feel unstable and totally out of control. So just like your friends try to pull you back to your old self, your own mind tries to pull you back too.
Which takes us to Section 3, misalignment over conflict.
So as you push past that internal gravity and you actually keep growing, your deep need for approval creates this fracture within you. You finally start to realize that closeness with someone was never actually the same thing as understanding, which begs the question, can understanding be forced? When relationships start to drift because of your growth, our natural human instinct is to try and fix it. We try to explain ourselves better, hoping to make the other person understand our evolution. But the reality from the source material is crystal clear. You simply cannot force understanding when your very evolution threatens someone else's core sense of self. It just doesn't work.
When we do try to force that understanding, we end up falling into a pretty tragic loop called the cycle of minimization. First, you sense the shift and that weird distance in others. Second, you begin negotiating your own identity. And third, you slowly compress yourself back into something familiar. You soften your edges and downplay your progress, all just to keep the atmosphere comfortable and avoid the emotional loss of the relationship. It's heartbreaking, really.
And that leads to a really harsh reality. You can be accepted or you can be fully seen, but rarely both. Just let that sink in for a second. It means that the support you thought you had was never really about your potential. It was about your compatibility with their comfort. The moment you outgrew that compatibility, the illusion of unconditional support just completely broke.
Finally, Section 4. The resolution and a mismatch of directions.
Once you finally grasp this whole dynamic, the anger and that stinging feeling of betrayal, it just kind of fades away. You realize this was never actually a battle between you and them. It's just the natural reality of growth. It's a mismatch of directions. Just because someone cares about you doesn't guarantee alignment. Loyalty definitely doesn't guarantee understanding. Growth silently changes the terms of every single relationship. When you no longer fit perfectly into their internal world, people will slowly step away to restore their own balance. And often, they'll just choose to interact with the memory of who you used to be rather than the reality of who you're becoming.
So, if there is literally one thing you take away from this explainer today, it's this. You absolutely have to keep moving forward. Not to prove anything to anyone, but because stopping would mean becoming someone you no longer recognize yourself. And shrinking yourself to remain recognizable to others, that is the ultimate and really the only failure that actually matters.
I want to leave you with this really provocative question to chew on. Who feels unsettled when you stop being who they expected? Take a really close look at your own circles this week. Notice the dynamics, pay attention to the subtle shifts in tone. If you have ever felt this subtle distance or quiet resistance from the people around you, drop down into the comments right now and simply type the word aware. Thank you so much for exploring this fascinating topic with me today, and hey, keep growing.